Then they come up and they say, well, you know what, Paige Brown in dispatch changed it, and it's a report to a show report. I don't know why they did that. I don't know why she did that. They haven't even offered an explanation for that. These are huge inconsistencies in trying to ascertain or to conclude that Michael Frassetti was acted wrongly. The evidence really shows he probably didn't. That somehow there was a failure of the system in some fashion, but not because of Michael Frassetti's failure. So then they try to glom on, they hogpile, and they say, oh, it's not just that he didn't do a report. The most egregious part of this is he lied about it. And they reach that conclusion not based on evidence, based on speculation, based on surmise, and based, I think, on wishful thinking for whatever reason, because they became defensive. Lieutenant Rose became defensive, and that defensiveness gets communicated upline to the chief, because everybody wants to be right. And once they form a decision, everybody is geared to trying to prove that they were correct. You shouldn't challenge it. Now, I'll give just one example, a very clear-cut example in this hearing today. There was an accusation of, of witness tampering, and that the officers, there was a claim, a cry. These witnesses out in the hall shouldn't be able to testify. You know who had been out in the hall and who passed the note was Lieutenant Rose, the same fellow who did the investigation in this case. There is a dysfunctional quality of investigation that people ignore in reaching the conclusions that they reach. When you read these interviews and you compare...
They really backed off of that.
I know, but I mean, that's typical of how this gets going. When you look at the report summary, the IA report summary, and I apologize, I don't remember the number that Lieutenant Rose prepared, and you compare his conclusions to the interviews, you're going to see he misstates what Paige Brown says. He says she denies that she did anything improper, and he basically concludes that she said she did. There's a lot of mischaracterization step by step. When you read the interviews, which you really need to do that, because if you look just at what the summary of it is, you're going to get it infused with Lieutenant Rose's misjudgments. Thank you. Then when you look at these records, and remember, these are all in his handwriting. And at the top, he's found these records, and he ignores the import of them. And they bring in poor Michael Denowith, who isn't a field officer. I mean, I understand. He's a computer techie guy, and they say, well, gee, this couldn't happen, this couldn't happen, this couldn't happen. They artfully don't ask all of the questions, because we're not really here looking for the truth. We're looking to nail Mike Frassetti. We're not here looking for the truth. This is an open inquiry. They already made their decision in the predetermination hearing. They tried to get a certification slashed at the FDLE level. And now when he says, wait a minute, I'm hearing arguments as if he's doing something wrong. He said, my God, he's putting you to the test, the challenge, when all he's asking for is due process. The very first time, he's had a chance to confront witnesses. Well, one would have thought that an investigative agency would be much more thorough and much more careful in their conclusions before they reach the draconian view that this man's a liar. And he's insubordinate to the very officer, Lieutenant Rose, who says he ordered him to do a report, when Mike Frassetti very candidly said, you don't have to order me to do a report. It's a ground ball to do one. You always do one. He knew that. And here it is. But if you have to ignore so many facts to get to the belief, the superstition that Mike Frassetti did something wrong. And it's only Lieutenant Rose who says he was insubordinate. Nobody else said, yeah, I heard him give an instruction to do a report. It's only Lieutenant Rose who says that. And then when you read Michael Frassetti's interviews, his testimony is consistent. He hasn't said anything different to Lieutenant Rose back then that he said in this courtroom today. He's even suggested, did you look at dispatch? Did you go there? Did you go here? Consistent with somebody who believes he did the report. Now, if it got lost, when you hear a dozen episodes of reports getting lost, I don't care if they can be retrieved somewhere in the system. The fault's not the officer. The lost report is not the officer's fault. But for some reason, the conclusion was he was to blame. And once that conclusion got locked in, Mike Frassetti never had a chance. Not for objectivity, not for justice. there was a rush to judgment that, by God, he's lying. And once they believed that, instead of saying, just even respectfully, you know, we don't have the report, instead of blaming Mike Frassetti for it when you have all these glitches, say, well, wait a minute, what could have happened to do this? I don't know, because I don't have the proof. You know, Mr. Ford, that Mr. Rose went out to the car in May or in June before Mike Denowith went out there, but it's suspicious when 2 months after the fact, he sends Mike Denowith out there, and Mike Denowith finds deletions. Clearly, Mr. Rose knew the password. He could have deleted it. I don't know why. You heard Mike Denowith say, I wouldn't have thought it helped anybody. I had no motive in not doing the report. I didn't believe that I could make deletions on my screen and get the report out of the system worldwide. And that's an important failure on the part of the Venice Police Department to prove their case. There's no motive, there's absolutely no reason, and there's no likelihood that Mike Frassetti would have acted in the way that they acted. They just want to believe it. But they agree that they can't show it was Mike Frassetti. And I know we're not here beyond to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, but the preponderance of the evidence doesn't even show that it was Mike Frassetti. All it shows is that some screens existed in his car, but the information exists in the system. So I don't know what happened. And we know those cars are shared. We know the password's not protected. We know that there were extraordinary, inordinate delays in checking. There was no opportunity for Mike to even be notified. If he had been timely told of it, he could have produced his field notes. Now, Mike Frassetti has said that he arrested Lieutenant Rose's nephew. No rebuttal to that. You know, I'd like to think that that kind of thing doesn't go on, but it could have gone on. Maybe, you know, if Mr. Frassetti is not on the force, he's not going to be there to testify. I don't know. And I'm not trying to say that I have evidence to accuse Lieutenant Rose of that. But what I am saying is there's not evidence here that can really legitimately cause Mike Frassetti to be determined to be guilty of something. And if there was some evidence, then if there was no report at all, this document, Exhibit A, wouldn't exist, couldn't exist. If what their theory of deletion is correct, this wouldn't be there. It just wouldn't be there. So I've been mystified as to really why they maintain that this is that there's no report, none was even attempted to be entered. It may be that they don't have it, but that doesn't mean it wasn't tried to be entered. That's what they haven't shown to be the case. They can't show that Mike Frassetti didn't try to submit the report, not when they on record show that the information ordinarily contained in those reports is in their records. How else would it have gone there? So on this record, one cannot logically conclude that there was a failure to try to submit the report. One can conclude that the system snafu'd in some fashion. Perhaps. But it's not even clear that Mike Frassetti is the one who was responsible when he had no motive to do it. Based on the failure of the evidence, we think Mike Frassetti, who's a good law officer, an experienced officer, on February 08, he's applauded for his report writing skills and investigatory skills. 2 months later, Lieutenant Rose says, "Oh no, you deserve to be fired." Or 3 months later, I mean, it was sometime in May, he says, "Okay, you deserve to be fired." What happened? I don't know. And I don't expect Lieutenant Rose to say, "Oh, I've just made all this up." But I do say that as objective evaluators of the facts, we can't really conclude that the problem even exists, that there wasn't a report to begin with. And if that fails, if there is any indication that there's a report to begin with, you can't logically believe that there was a failure on Mike Frassetti's part, insubordination on Mike Frassetti's part, or inefficiency, or whatever the other claim was. And clearly evidence shows that Mike interviewed when he was asked to interview. He cooperated in those interviews. When you read it, you can see he's respectful. I don't know where the insubordination comes from, except Lieutenant Rose says, well, I told him to do a report. He didn't. I don't find that very believable, really, that he actually ordered him to do a report. And then he himself didn't even tell him the next day, hey, I'm doing the report I wanted. So I think you get where I'm coming from.